and welcome to the October 22nd, 2019 regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the dais this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, the city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the Planning Commission, please come forward when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-on sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. And at this time, I ask that all cell phones, Blackberries, PDAs, or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting, please be either placed in silent mode or turned off. Ms. Zarnicki, the roll call, please.
Mr. Abhidian?
Here.
Ms. Cruz? Here. Mr. Faison?
Here.
Ms. Fowler?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Mr. Rahman?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Quorum is present. Item number 2 is the approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Make a
Mr.
motion
Krent,
to approve.
yeah, and support? Mr. Abhidian, thank you. Ms. Zarnicki?
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Motion carries. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes of the October 8th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. If there are no questions on the minutes, can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Mr. Lambert, thank you. And support? Ms. Fowler? Ms. Zarnicki?
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Motion carries. Item number 4 is public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to comment on an item that's not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I'll move to item number 5. Preliminary Site Plan Review, SP JPLN 2019-0031. Proposed GFA Hopedale Site Condominium, 7 units/lots, north of Hopedale, west of John R., south of Square Lake, 882011277024, Section 11, currently zoned R1C, 1 family residential district. Mr. Carlisle.
Yes. Thank you and good evening. The first item before you tonight is a proposed site condominium of 7 single-family detached homes. The site is located on Hopedale, which is just south of Square Lake, just west of John R. The site in question is outlined in red, fluttering in front of you. It's approximately 2.76 acres in area. It's currently zoned R1C, and it has an existing house on the site. I will note that it is the northern property line is actually at the stub of Viking, which was intended for extension when to Hopedale when that part of the subdivision was approved. The applicant is requesting approval to construct 7 unit single-family detached lots. Again, this would be an extension of Viking Road to connect to Hopedale. The property, again, is zoned R1C, and this is a permitted by right development, and the site plan layout does comply with all R1C district requirements as set forth in the zoning ordinance. With regards to landscaping, it does meet all the landscaping requirements. We also note that the applicant is preserving approximately 16 trees on site. This includes 2 landmark trees and 14 woodland trees, and the applicant greatly exceeds the tree mitigation requirements as a result of the saving of those trees. The applicant has submitted 3 different elevations and floor plans. The primary material is brick. This is one elevation. This is a second elevation. And that is a proposed third elevation. So we are recommending preliminary site plan approval.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle? Mr. Lambert.
Do we know, and maybe Mr. Savinet might know the answer to this, when that northern property was developed approximately?
2001.
Okay, I thought I remembered it, so.
Anything else? Okay, I'd like to invite the applicant to come up and present their project.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you for your time tonight. I am the owner of the property that's going to be developed. Ben and Brent did a great job explaining everything that's going to happen. We're saving trees, we're connecting the road, we're going to build houses that are going to be beautiful to complement the existing houses that are there. I stopped and I talked to all the people that have property that abut my property. Majority of them don't have an issue with it. Had questions of trees being removed, and you can see we're saving more trees than I think what we're required to do. There's a lot of trees that are dead on the property that are coming down, and I actually have one person who wants me to build them a ranch on there, which I didn't notice is we do sell ranches in our sub also, but they're a custom-built ranch. We don't have a floor plan. We will let the people come in and custom design whatever they want for a ranch. I'm here mostly today to take any questions if you might have any for me.
Yeah, Mr. Grant.
So I noticed that the fronts are all brick. Do the sides and the back contain brick, or?
I was very disappointed Mr. Tago wasn't here today
Yeah.
because I have 4 sides of brick and the front's all the way up, and they are 4 sides of brick.
Very good, very nice. I just
Thank
took
you.
over John's job. That's
All right. Well, like I say, I looked at the existing 8 houses on Viking, and I told the neighbors they're just beautiful houses, and I want to just complement those with the houses that look the same and go right down the street.
very nice. Good to hear.
Thank you.
What's your expected price point for the homes?
$575 to $600.
And then what about the ranch?
The ranch will be, depending on their size, if they want $2,300, probably roughly in the $180 per square foot price.
Thank you. Anything else for the applicant? Thank you. Any more discussion?
I do
Chris.
have one question. Excuse me, Mr. Carlisle, when you had your PowerPoint presentation up there, you showed the 3 elevations of the home. Could you show me elevation 2 and elevation 3 again? I don't know what you guys are thinking, but I'm wondering if there's enough difference between the 2 elevations that it is in compliance with our ordinance on elevations, and how they can't have 2 of the same elevations like side by side. We have to go A, B, C, A, B, C.
So these are 3, not to speak for Mr. Abathera, but so these are 3 kind of typical designs. What Mr. Abathera and other developers do is there's variation that is available to them within each of these designs so that they can meet the ABC requirements.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I'm looking at them, and it's, and mind you, these are small drawings. I mean, we don't have anything that's been given to us that's 3-dimensional or color or, you know, these are just small drawings. And they look, the number 2 and number 3 just look exactly the same, except on this elevation where you have your bay windows, you have some other kind of material, but otherwise they just don't seem to have the variation.
So one
that I think we look for.
elevation, though, the garage is on the left. That's a front elevation, and actually it's a side-loaded garage for number
Okay.
2. And then the first one, did I go the wrong way? Yeah. The first one, the garage is on the right. So there is some variation in all 3 of these.
Okay, well, slight.
And for example, if the next unit was a different one of the different designs, but had a 2-car garage versus a 3-car garage, that's a difference. there's a menu of differences. They can go from a hip roof to a gambrel roof. I mean, I don't want to speak for Mr. Abathira, he can tell you himself, but these are 3 options. I'm sure he's got more that would be consistent in design with these, but the developers don't provide every combination and permutation that is at their disposal. They provide typicals, and then when they submit floor plans and elevations for building permits, they have to demonstrate to the building official that there's enough variation for the ABC.
Okay.
Just a question on this, to go back to Mr. Krent's question. So the right, the rear, the left, what's the material on the second floor? Yes, I think that's probably best for you, sir.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So the right, the rear, and the left elevation there,
So
what's the
that house-
material on the second floor?
Well, that house right now, just to answer Mrs. Cruz's question, is a story and a half. Has a master bedroom on the first floor, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Totally different house than the third elevation you saw, and then the other was the same house with a sidecar entry to have breaking up. The material on there is going to be vinyl siding on the second story, but we also have options to put the wood lapping up there.
Okay, so when you say it's brick on 4 sides, you mean the
First floor up, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And then the second question I had, you just mentioned it, I saw you had the one elevation with the first floor master suite. What's the target market for that versus the ones with the
You
second?
find all types. You find families that want them. You find, people that are at the end that want to, they want the master on the first floor. So, and it has a master on
I
the
usually
first
see that
floor.
with a smaller footprint home, that's why I was asking.
That one's still a 3,000
Exactly,
square
yeah.
foot house.
Yeah.
So. But we put vinyl up there. It's a maintenance free. I don't want to get into something like T111 where you got to paint all the time and something like that. So we're going with either vinyl or we will put a cement product up there and have it painted.
Will the owner have the choice?
Vinyl will be standard. The other will be an upcharge.
Oh, I feel like Mr. Tagle wouldn't like that.
He would, but I'm not wrapping it. And I mean, it's people have their preference of which one they want to go with. I mean, the one is, and I've talked to him before, is you have to do maintenance on the cement board. You have to paint them. It might be every 7, 10, 12 years, but you do. Vinyl, you never have to. So, I mean, we get people that want vinyl up, underneath, everywhere, so they never have to touch a paintbrush. It's strictly what the people want is what we do. We're very hands-on, giving them all their options.
Yes, Mr. Brahma.
Question. So between vinyl and brick, how much is the cost difference you approximate?
Well, the cement board is a little bit more that you put up there. I'm not drawing a blank as a name on it, but you have to have it painted also. And I did notice there's a sub around the corner from me that 3 years later they're over there repainting it already.
No, I'm saying brick. If you just
Oh, I'm going to go 2 stories in brick. Shooting off the hip, it'd probably be $10,000 or $12,000 to make a 2-story brick house, which is not a very common thing. You will see it in the $1 million, $2 million homes. You'll see 2-story of brick, but not in this price range.
but anything else will be in between, right? Like
I'm sorry?
less than $12,000.
Yeah.
Anything in between, like instead of vinyl, you have wood.
No. No, it's either all brick or you do the cement board.
Cement board, it will be how much?
Oh, probably a $3,000 option. So. But like I say, that's painted, and if you want to sell a maintenance-free home, because like Mrs. Cruz says, she wants to move into a house like that, you don't want to go outside painting on the second story in 7, 10, 12 years. So that's why they want maintenance-free.
I'd
all
pick
their
the
own.
cement
But
board
it's
and
a-
paint it.
It's
Okay, but I mean, everybody's got their own opinion.
So you mentioned it will be 500 and above $500,000 house.
This house will be just under 600,000, 570.
Vinyl on a $600,000 house. Sound, I'm not sure, And if it is only $3,000 difference, so why not make it mandatory? Like all of the houses are.
Well, I would give the people an option, but I don't want to take vinyl away from them. They want vinyl. I mean, I did the houses over on Alpine Meadows, and those were $650, $700. Not one person complained about vinyl siding.
And I don't know if customers are aware of the fact that, that it's only $3,000 difference. It makes a difference to me.
Okay.
I know that John Tagle wouldn't like it, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I will look into that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else for the applicant? Mr. applicant?
I noticed that the road is a private road. Is that a typo?
It's a typo. It's a
Okay.
public road.
Gonna make my, that was gonna.
I have the best engineering company
I
in the
was gonna throw
city,
a curveball in
and
there.
they still make some mistakes.
Okay.
Anything else for the applicant?
No.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
So, turning to Mr. Savidan, so this is not a public hearing, but I think we typically open the floor for residents to speak, right?
We typically do, yes. And I would like to just state for the record that we did receive one item of correspondence from a resident, Dr. K. Uwe and Ulrich Wagner, and that just, if they're in attendance or watching on TV, we did provide your comments to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. So with that, I'd invite anyone who would like to come up to speak on this project. Yes, sir. So again, it's not a public hearing, but I'd ask you to follow the rules of a public hearing. So limit your comments to 3 minutes, address your comments to the body, and it won't be a dialogue. We'll take your comments and deliberate on them,
Okay.
or consider them in our deliberation.
Okay, thank you.
So please
good
state your
evening.
name and
Okay.
write your name and address down. Thank you.
My name is Andreas Gebauer. I live on 5548 Viking Drive. So I'm just north of that lot number 4 that was up there earlier. When I purchased the house in 2003, so I'm above on the right there, I saw in the planning commission here, because my decision to buy the house was because I wanted to be on a cul-de-sac road, and at that time there was a turnaround at the end of the road. There was not a through road planned, and that's why I purchased this property. And so I'm quite surprised that people said it was developed as a through road, because that definitely wasn't the case when I looked at the city plans at the time. So my question is, can that be just changed or was changed afterwards? Because I heard earlier on it was planned as a through road, but it was not true when I looked at the plans. And then the other question I had was the side garage houses. Would they be permitted in any of those 7 lots, or could they be only on the ends, so that you don't have a house very close to you and the cars kind of angled towards your house? So in my case, so number 4, could there be a side garage that faces my property? Well, I have a 2.5 garage, so it's not a full 3 garage, so it's kind of narrow, the garage that's closer to 4. So that was my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience? Yes, sir.
My name. My name is Mircea Castellu. I live on Viking. It's 5563 Viking. It's on the northwest side of the proposed site. And I have the same comment. The main reason we bought the house was the dead end. I mean, hands down. That was the main reason. And obviously, probably we're not required, and I don't know laws, and I'm just saying I'm saying it as a concerned citizen. Had I known that that was a problem, probably I wouldn't have bought a house. I mean, possible to expand. It was a problem because we didn't have the bus coming to pick up my daughters, so we had to drop them off at John R. But there was no traffic, zero traffic. It was just us, and that was the main reason we actually got the house. Now with the pass-through, it will be a much bigger traffic, and I feel like the values of the houses will actually go down probably because of that, because it's not going to be a cul-de-sac or a dead end anymore. So that's my main concern. So I'm not sure if it means anything, and I could probably speak for everyone on the neighborhood. Everybody's concerned about that. all the houses on Viking. The development was in 2003, and there was no anything about what's going to happen on the other side, like on this site that's now under development. So thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Paul Krebs. I live on 1896 Hopedale, directly across the street from the house that's going to be torn down. We have a couple concerns. One, Hopedale's a narrow street. There's no parking on that side of the street, and they do it. And sometimes they park there, and it impedes our mail delivery. So they have to understand the city law is it says no parking, no parking. At any time. I mean, they can park, I guess, to unload stuff, but not for 3 or 4 hours. Because a school bus comes down there, it's a narrow street. Other concern was, where's the street going to come out? Because we were told it's going to come right out in our front yard. And I'm opposed to that. Just like the gentleman said, I'm not sure if it's going to devalue my property or not. And then the other question we had was, about a month ago, we had a windstorm and knocked a tree down that was dead, took the power out in the whole neighborhood. DT&E came and cleaned it up. They hired a contractor, and they just cut the logs up and threw them in the yard, and they laid there for a couple of weeks. Not a couple of weeks, about a week. And then the developer came by and saw it. He moved them, but he just moved them, dumped them in the back. So hopefully he keeps the property cleaned up as he progresses through the building process. But my major concern is the parking, because it is a narrow street. And the other one is the street entrance. You know, is it going to be right? Is it going to be right at the end of my driveway? That's one of my major concerns. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Yes.
My name is Ulrich Wagner. You have already a letter from my husband and myself. We live on 5564 Viking. I would like to point out that the applicant failed to mention that he is planning, per his plans, to destroy 80% of the landmark trees and about half of the woodland trees. And given all the construction that has been going on in just a 2-block radius, and the destruction of green space that has been going on in the last 18 months, I would like to request that this site is dedicated as green space for all our neighbors to enjoy and to keep the value of our properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on this item? Okay, thank you. So back to the Planning Commission. I had a couple of, well, maybe one question for you, Ms. up there. The comment or question about the side garages and I guess the northernmost properties.
Yes, the side garage is going to go on the lot closest to Hopedale. That was my plan. If you have the plan, it shows I think it's lot 7, was set up for the side entry. The lots are too narrow to do side entries further on down, and that would take care of that. I'm glad it came back. There was more thing. If you notice on your site plan, it does show the retention pond, and there's a note on it that if there is off-site detention in another location, that would become Lot 8. I wanted to make sure that it was brought up to your attention before, so you know it. It's 7 lots right now with the detention basin, but the city staff would love to find an off-site that we could put our retention to hold our water in there, which we are looking to either purchase another lot somewhere that we could move it and we'd be all set. And my third one is, can you go back front to the overhead? The traffic, people are worried about traffic cutting through, is on Abbotsford is a dead-end street. It stops at the end of Abbotsford. It does not connect into the new subdivision that we had a year and a half ago. It's an EVA, so there's only 12 homes on the west side that those 12 cars, I don't think would come up Abbotsford, make a right, come down Viking, make a left, and go on to John R. And vice versa. I think the only ones going on Viking is going to be the people that live on Viking going one way or the other way. So I don't think it's going to be a heavily traveled area. I think it would be safer that Abbotsford is a 20-foot wide gravel road with no sidewalks, which we hear about all the time in the city. And the school bus route then would be on Hopedale, and the kids can walk down Viking to Hopedale to get to the bus and not have to sit on the corner of Abbotsford and John R. to get to the bus in the morning. So I think it's a safer way of having the street put in. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Anything else for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. Ms. Abiadi?
Question for Mr. Savina. Without having the plans and the details of that project that was built in the 2000s, just in general terms, is it possible to actually have a preliminary site plan approved with the cul-de-sac and final site plan approved by engineering is changed with just a standard dead end? Has that, to your knowledge, has that happened in the past, or is that possible?
I'm not going to speak conceptually. I'm going to reference the specific site plan that was reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission and ultimately reviewed and recommended approval at the time by Planning Commission and approved by City Council in 2001. It showed a dead-end street. So that was reviewed and approved with a dead-end street. I didn't jump into the site plan and do a lot of research. We just looked at it. My guess is at the time when the houses on Viking were being proposed, that the owner of the home to the south that property that's under consideration today just didn't want to sell. So it was designed with a dead end so it could be extended in the future like it is being proposed today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Abiadi. Thank you.
One of the requests we heard here tonight by one of the residents is that either the Planning Commission, the Planning Department, or Council, through some process, dedicate this space as green space for the neighborhood to enjoy and to use. Is there any process, any way possible to prohibit this project and convert this to green space dedicated only to the neighbors to use?
Well, I suppose Mr. Abathira, assuming he owns a property now, could sell to the neighbors and they could pay the market value and dedicate it as a park if they so choose. My assumption is the property was for sale and neighbors could have purchased it and dedicated it, but that didn't happen.
And to your point, or it's private property and this development is by right.
It's by right. The owner of the property has development rights. Basically, the development rights are consistent with the development rights that applied to the property to the north, that with houses that front on both sides of Viking. It's the same requirements, same minimum lot size, same setbacks, same height requirements, et cetera, that were in place in 2001. So he's basically seeking, he wants to, he has the same rights that were in place in 2001 when the property to the north was developed.
And those rights apply for what we see here before us as 7 units, but also 8 units.
That's correct.
Right? If they deal with the detention.
Yeah, and what Mr. Abathura is referring to is this is a site condominium, and there's we have more of an expert here on the law than I am, but I mean, the site condominium law does allow for a convertible area where the use of the property, for example, as a detention basin, is potentially convertible to be used as a unit. What Mr. Abathura was speaking about was if stormwater detention is available elsewhere and there's not a need for a detention basin at this location, what he seeks is approval to convert that from a detention basin to a single-family lot.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? No? Mr. Happy-Hitting.
And that part of the process would be approved in final engineering, final site plan approval. It would never come back to us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Seeing no more comments, I'd ask if we're ready for a resolution.
I'll do it.
Mr. Krent, thank you.
Resolved that preliminary site condominium approval pursuant to Article 8 and Section 10.02 of the zoning ordinance as requested for GFA Hopedale Site Condominium 7 units / lots north of Hopedale, west of John R., south of Square Lake, 88-20-11-277-024, Section 11, currently zoned R1C, One Family Residential District, be granted.
One question, do we have to reference the potential for 8 lots in the resolution?
I would defer to the city attorney on this, but my suggestion would be that we would want to reference it.
Yeah, that was also, I would recommend that you do reference that.
Okay.
So
So subject to,
you would support the convertible area being utilized as an additional eighth unit,
and just what he said.
subject to engineering approval.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Does that work, Ms. Arnick?
Do we have support for that motion? I do.
That's, I wanted to make sure we had the resolution down, but yeah, now I would ask for support. Mr. Lambert. So ready for the vote.
Okay. Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes. Motion carries. Item number 6 on tonight's agenda is a public hearing. Conditional rezoning, CRJPLN 2019001. Proposed MNK Troy 1 LLC conditional rezoning, east side of Rochester Road, south of Shallowdale, 882014152001 and 882014301031, Section 14 from R1C, One Family Residential, RT, One Family Attached Residential, and EP, Environmental Protection Districts to RT, One Family Attached Residential, and EP, Environmental Protection Districts. Mr. Carlisle.
Quite a mouthful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Tonight, the second item before you is a public hearing for a conditional rezoning. There's 2 parcels located on Rochester Road, located actually on the east side of Rochester Road. 3.77 acres in total in area. The applicant tonight proposed to conditionally rezone the parcels from RT, R1C, and EP to RT and EP. With regards to context, the site is surrounded by single family to the north under R1C zoning, RT, one family attached to the south, the east is R1C, as well as the west is R1C. This site has a little bit of history attached to it. In 2002, the city rezoned approximately 12.14 net acres to RT, as well as 1.13 net acres to EP. It's shown in that kind of bizarre-looking red outline of what was rezoned. So of that total, 11 acres was actually developed as Briggs Park as part of the R1T zoning. The remaining portions of it, both the EP and the remaining portions of the RT, were not developed. They have not been developed. And then the parcel to the north, which is not shown as part of this rezoning, the applicant is actually asking to have that rezoned as well to include with what the portion is already zoned RT for rezoning. So what's left of that is this. You have R1C zoning on the north side of the 2 lots. You have RT kind of making a kind of a quarter moon shape for the lots, and then you have EP zoning in the back. So Exhibit A and Exhibit B shows what the existing zoning is, and it's consistent with the R1C on the north, RT in the middle, and EP on the east end. And then what's proposed is RT in totality and EP along the buffering of the east side. So currently there's approximately about an acre of R1C, about 1.5 acres of RT, and approximately almost an acre of EP. The applicant is asking to rezone for a total of 3.2 acres of RT and a half acre of EP. So this is a repeat of the last two public hearings we've had with regards to Rochester roads in terms of land use policies since 1999. In 1999, the city amended their master land use plan and added medium density residential along Rochester Road north of Wattles. This runs from Wattles all the way up to South Boulevard. In 2002, the city adopted a future land use plan, which was consistent with the previous master plan, which did retain medium density residential on Rochester Road north of Wattles. In 2008, the city adopted an amended city master plan, and again, and that established the Rochester Road land use classification, which called for medium to low density multifamily on Rochester Road. This designation called for more intense development at the nodes. This is where we got the neighborhood node zoning, but in between those nodes calls for low-rise office and multifamily between those nodes, between the major mile intersections. And again, also talked about use of innovative stormwater management. So for the last 20 years, the land use policies of the city has called for medium density residential along Rochester Road. So in concept, the proposing to RT is consistent with the land use policies of the city. And again, there is a scattering of already existing RT along Rochester Road, including directly south, it's like a ghost, directly south is also RT zoning. So again, RT zoning is a result of policies that have been in place for medium density along Rochester Road. As part of the rezoning, the applicant has offered a number of conditions. This is just a concept plan, just for potential layout. What the applicant has noted is that development should be limited to a maximum of 9 buildings, 32 units. The maximum lot coverage to be covered by buildings shall be 20%. The building height shall be 2.5 stories, 30 feet, which is consistent with the R1C zoning as well. The minimum building setbacks will be 50 feet in the front, 35 in the rear, and the sides will be 30 feet and 10 feet. The EP zoning will remain, and it shall be a 100 feet wide section off the west property line, or it should be the west side of the east property line. Open space preservation covenant will be provided over the EP zoning area, and a minimum guaranteed open space shall be 15%. In reviewing the conditional rezonings, we do note there are some inconsistencies between the conditional rezoning as well as what's permitted in the RT. First and foremost is the applicant is applying the lot area in the EP zoning towards the total area of lot density. This is not a permitted practice to be done. So in essence, they're getting more density than it would be allowed if this rezoning were approved. Secondly, the proposed setbacks listed in the rezoning exhibit in the letter says 10 feet in 30 feet. It actually differs a little bit on the plan, so that needs to be corrected. And lastly, the applicant is proposing 15% open space. However, the minimum landscape requirement in that district is 20%, so it has to be at least 20% open space. So when we consider rezoning, we always talk about what can be done by right versus what can be done under rezoning. The biggest difference, for the most part, the biggest difference is density. Under the current zoning, under R1C, they could get probably a plus or minus 4 units off the one parcel, 16 units off the RT, so that's about a total of 20 units. If it were zoned to RT, they could get a maximum of 27 units as shown. They have asked for 32, so that 5 extra units is the difference between the area of the EP zoning that was added to the RT area. The height remains the same, 2.5 stories, 30 feet. The setbacks are for the most part consistent with what would be allowed under both RT as well as the R1C. And again, the open space would be 30% in the R1C and 20% in the RT. There are 5 standards that the Planning Commission considers when they make a recommendation to a rezoning. This includes, is it consistent with the master plan? Will it increase or cause a nonconformity? Can the site be serviced by public facilities and services? Will the rezoning impact public health, safety, and welfare? And lastly, will the rezoning ensure compatibility with adjacent land? In reviewing the standards, we do find that the site has been master planned for medium-density residential for at least the last 20 years. Rezoning the portion of the site to R1C is consistent with the master plan. In addition, the applicant is providing increased buffering along the northern and eastern property line that what is currently allowed under the RT. However, we do note that there are some inconsistencies with the application. They are reducing the size of the existing EP zoning, and again, offering a density that's not permissible with the rezoning as submitted. So with all that being said, we are recommending the Planning Commission consider the application, hold a public hearing, consider public comment, and provide direction to the applicant to clarify their application. Thank you.
Thank you. So one question I have is the EP rezoning. Is the criteria for rezoning that the same as you have up there for going up from R1C to RT?
Correct. Yes, the same standards are used for any zoning of any property. It's the same 5 standards that the Planning Commission should consider. EP zoning is talked about in the master plan, so there's different master plan implications, but the standards themselves are the same for any zoning district.
So the protections of the EP space is no different than any other zoning?
Not when you consider the standards, but you have to consider their variables in terms of differences of protection of adjacent properties, master plan, et cetera. So the standards are the same, but how you apply them differ for EP versus RT zoning or R1C or any other zoning district.
And I was specifically thinking about green space preservation, so thank you. Anything else for Sam? Mr. Hudson?
I'd like to follow up on your EP question. Brent, can we go back to, I think it was one of the first slides where you compared the existing zoning and the proposed zoning, showing the
exhibits.
EP areas?
The exhibits, Mr. Hudson?
Right next to that one. Yeah, I think that.
Right there, yeah.
So
Just the one, yes.
So
it looks like we're carving and reducing the presently zoned EP to a smaller area on this one.
That's correct, Mr. Hudson. If you follow
Why would we do that if the standards say we need that EP, the larger size?
That's a question for the Planning Commission to consider as part of the rezoning. The applicant's request is to reduce the size of the EP zoning, but that should be part of the discussion.
So you'd like to reduce the EP and reduce the open space percentage?
Well, he can't.
From 20 to 15.
He cannot reduce the open space percentage. You can't use or conditional rezoning to reduce the zoning standard. So he's got to meet the minimum zoning.
I understand that.
Part of his request, though, is to reduce the area of the EP zoning from what is now approximately an acre, it's 0.93, to what's shown as 0.57 acres.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rappahannock.
So my follow-up question also is regarding the EP zoning. Do we have a standard? So my first question is, that original EP zoning, what's the intent of that? Is that just to create that buffer to the existing property to the east there and to the north? Is that really what originally was intended to do?
At the time, the intent of the EP zoning, as I recollect, was to serve as a buffer for the potential property that was considered at the time with the residential neighbors located to the north and to the east.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is there a minimum, or was there a minimum requirement for that EP zoning, for that buffer at that time, the way it exists today? Is there an actual number? Is there a setback? Is there anything like that, or is it just?
No.
Okay.
In a word, no. It was used. It hasn't been used so much recently, but historically, based on what I've gathered, EP was used for 2 reasons. One was to protect environmentally sensitive areas, such as floodplains and woodlands and things like that. And the second was to serve as a transition buffers between single-family residential and more intense uses, which I believe is what the intent of this EP zoning was.
Okay, and may I, one more question on the EP?
Yes, Mr. Rappahannock.
Does our zoning ordinance restrict converting that existing EP to the proposed EP with a minimum setback? Is there anything in the ordinance that says it must be 50 feet, it must be minimum 75, or is that really what the discussion is tonight, what we're having here?
Yeah, I don't believe there's a restriction. That's what we're here this evening is to talk about.
Okay.
If I may, a lot of times with the EP zoning, there'd be also a conservation easement with it. That's not the case in this particular situation.
So the easement would have actually made it easier on us because it would have had an exact dimension and said, this is the actual setback, and it would have given that delineation how far back we can go, right? In this
Yeah.
case, it doesn't.
And again, I think that Mr. Sabadan is right in that the original intent in doing this was to provide that buffer because you had your more intense uses. This is one of the first ones that was proposed and approved with the more intense development.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Fowler?
I just want to clarify, so there is no environmentally sensitive property in this EP?
That's correct, to the best of our knowledge. There are trees, but when I initially mentioned environmentally sensitive, I was referring to things like wetlands, floodplains, endangered species, things like that. By that criteria, there are no environmentally sensitive areas that we're aware of.
Mr. Lambert?
Yeah, I guess if you stick around long enough, you'll see something come back that you once dealt with before, and I remember dealing with this back in 2002, and essentially back then, and I'm sure the staff can elaborate on much more professionally, but the city had limited ability to kind of offer these buffers, and we didn't have at that time the cluster ordinance, I don't believe, and we didn't have several other tools that now we have as a city to be able to kind of provide buffering. The one question I have is, and I know this is an ongoing question that goes on between zoning and master plan, is in 2002 when both Planning Commission and City Council rezoned it to provide the kind of the buffer with both the environmental protection and the R1C. Was this ever considered when the master plan was updated since then? Was this dealt with at all?
No, I think we, I don't believe we really addressed the technical word wonky zoning. I mean, you're absolutely right, Mr. Lambert. We did not have the cluster ordinance as we have it today as a tool, nor do we have conditional rezoning. It was not a legal instrument that was at our disposal. This was an early attempt to have what is essentially conditional rezoning, because what they wanted to do, they listened to the neighbors, they met with a bunch of neighbors, or certainly listened to them at public hearing, and they tried to come up with a zoning plan, if you will, that kind of placated some of the concerns. The problem is, though, that once the property, all the rezonings occurred, the developer walked away, and the application that was going to be contemplated, it never came to fruition. So we're left with the remnants, which is the zoning.
Mr. Crane?
Again, for staff, just to clarify in my mind, that curved dash line below it or south of that line that's in the top rectangle, is that R1, is that RT now, or is that R1C below that dash line, that curved dash line?
So currently, let's look up here. Currently, this little half moon,
yeah,
this whole area is all zoned RT.
Okay.
This parcel actually has split zoning, so it's got RT on part of the southern part, and then R1C above it, and then the EP is in the back.
Very good.
The back end.
That's
so it's one of the most unusual zoning configurations I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? With that, I'd like to invite the applicant to come up and present their project.
Good evening. John Thompson with PEA, representing MNK Troy 1 LLC. I think we've heard a lot of good comments from the planning consultant, as well as some we've heard here currently. What I'd like to do respectfully is defer until after the Planning Commission to answer any questions. After the public hearing, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So with that, I'll open the public hearing. Okay, but before we start, I just want to read some instructions. A public hearing is an opportunity for residents to share their comments on a specific project with the Planning Commission. Everyone in the audience who wishes to speak will be provided with that opportunity. We appreciate everyone who came out tonight to share their thoughts with the Planning Commission and view your comments as important. However, I need to set some ground rules so the public hearing is effective. and efficient. Please begin your comments by stating your name and address for the public record. Please address your comments to the Planning Commission only and no one else in the room. Please be respectful of the Planning Commission, the staff and consultant, the applicants, and those in attendance. This is a forum for you to make comments, but it's not a discussion or debate with the members of the Planning Commission. Finally, I ask that those in the audience refrain from talking, clapping, or cheering, or making any noise like that during the meeting, and that each of you have 3 minutes of comments, or restrict your comments to 3 minutes, and you see on the timer, it'll go from green to yellow to red. When it's red, that means your 3 minutes are up. So with that, I'd like to open the public hearing and invite whoever would like to come up to speak to speak.
Thank you. My name's John Hughes. I live at 4495 Harold. That's the long property that's in the corner there. This is the rezoning of the EP section is mostly going to affect our property. And I'd like to just state what was said by some earlier, that one of the major reasons that we purchased the property that we did was because of the environmental protection zoning behind it. And this will significantly affect that and our view. So I oppose that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else? Yes, please.
Is it possible for me to defer till after the applicant gives his information?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. I was expecting the same courtesy that they got because we have a lot of information. I'm James McCauley. I live at 4435 Harold Drive. I'm also a representative of Shellbrook Subdivision Homeowners Association. So I'm representing our subdivision, and I was the person that negotiated that EP zone and the R1T way back in 2002. So I have a lot of information that will definitely take longer than 3 minutes, which I guess we've already started.
Right. We have.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. First of all, if you look at that site, that EP was put in as a buffer. If you look at the residence at 4463 all the way down to 4449, that was to give the setback back away from the building within 100 feet of that. If you reduce that EP zone, you're going to reduce it by 60% of what was negotiated during that time. Also, we're opposed to that. Also, understand that with using the EP as applied to the overall lot density, we're opposed to that because we think that that just gives them more units per space than what they really need. They're proposing 32. The Carlisle Wortman report that you have cites 27. That would be better from the 32. Also, if you look at basically, that's reaffirmed in the page 37 of your packet that they said that the that size should not be permitted. Also, we are opposed to reducing the open space area from 15% from 20% as required, because again, that's cutting into our green belt, cutting into our buffer, as we're supposed to have adjacent property and it's supposed to be as least intrusive as possible. So we want to see that taken back to where it should be. Also, I see no mention of detention or retention on there, and so we have no idea what is going on with regarding to that. We strongly opposed the detention retention ponds that went in at Briggs Park south of it as to the health and safety of our community with the Canadian goose in there, which is still a problem today. So we want to look at what that applicant has in store for that. As I was looking at their application, I see items missing from the conditional rezoning rezoning packet that they have. I didn't see landscaping, didn't see any anything regarding, it's just not complete. Landscaping and floor plans and that type of stuff. I didn't know if that was required or not. We would like to see this item tabled to give the homeowners and the builders and the city a chance to look at all the different aspects of it so we can build something that we all agree on. We want something that we're all happy with, something that we know that's going to come in there, but we want to say in how it's going to be developed in the sense that how it impacts our community and what we have negotiated and put in place in order to move forward from 2003. The current zoning of this property was to accommodate R1T with R1C and R1C and EP as a border. We're opposed to the erosion of our buffer.
Thank you. You're very efficient with your 3 minutes.
Well, yeah, I've had some practice.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak on the project? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any planning commissioner comments before I ask the applicant to come back up? Mr. Hudson.
Yes. We have for 2 or 3 years in this planning commission, when we have new developments come forth before us, everybody is concerned about losing green space. Looks to me like in 2002, they had a good example. They got it zoned that way. And I think it's a great mistake to reduce that EP and to reduce the percentage of open space. And I think unless that plan is changed substantially, I'm going to have a hard time approving it.
Thanks for your feedback. Mr. Krant.
I'd like to, again, agree with the comment Mr. Hudson just made. You know, this line, that curved line, was agreed upon not only by the Planning Commission, but voted on and approved by City Council. People then buying the neighboring property saw that as zoned that way. And that was an agreement reached between the neighbors, City Council, and at that time the developer with the Briggs project. I don't see why we should upend that agreement.
I have the same concern about green space, but yes, Mr. Lambert.
Before I said any more, I don't know if we wanted to bring the petitioner back up to respond to the
I think we do it. Certainly we do at some point, but I want to know if anybody else had anything to say before I did that. Yes.
So I just have more of a question for Mr. Savinant. Does a parcel or a part of a parcel that is zoned EP, does it have a smaller chance of being permitted to get rezoned as an R1C and RT? I'm not sure if I phrased my question correctly. Does an EP parcel have an equal chance of getting rezoned?
Does it have extra protection because it's
Correct.
The classification is EP versus R1C, for example?
Right.
No, it does not. The standards apply equally to all zoning districts.
Okay.
And EP stands for environmentally protected?
That's correct.
So we call it a protected zoning, but it's equally up for grabs as any other zoning?
That's correct.
The applicant, so let's come up and address some of the comments.
Good evening again. So with respect to the EP zoning, this really leads back to prior to the Michigan Enabling Act of 2006. In the city, we didn't have a mechanism to do the open space agreements. As we talked about, we didn't have the cluster ordinance. So this was kind of used as the create a buffer / some open space area type of ordinance. To be most specific, the original site plan as approved, this EP zoning, was the detention pond. So there's no environmentally protected area within this under the original discussion of under the original intent for this approval. It was quite simply the detention area. It would look, had it been developed, quite similar to what you see in Briggs Park today. A cleared grass area with a detention pond. So what we thought is that we could provide a buffer between the residents by still granting the EP zoning and still meeting the intent of an EP zoning. The fact of the matter is right now you have a zoning but no real protection. We'd propose to provide an open space agreement, conservation easement over a 100-foot area in order to create something that's going to be much stronger than just the zoning ordinance. As you know from one of the cluster ordinances, these open space ordinances are quite stringent in terms of what can and can't be done within them. So that was kind of our thought process. We would provide at least 100 feet or 100 foot of buffer between the two zonings and or between the R1C and the RT to create a substantial buffer, much more than we see in most developments in terms of a buffer area. And I think we're more complying with the idea of the ordinance than the original intent of having a big detention pond covering the whole entire area. Unfortunately, that plan was never developed, and I'll go back to the term wonky as Brent described it. This makes this property almost undevelopable. You've got the semicircles and the split zoning, and a zoning layout that was created specifically for one site plan. So in order to really utilize this property properly, it really needs to be, the wonky zoning needs to be cleaned up, and that's what we're asking for. So with respect to some of the inconsistencies, there's some clarification on the site plan, on the setbacks, which we can certainly clarify. Our intent was to actually provide additional setback, a 30-foot setback instead of a 10-foot setback, as allowed by the RT zoning. So we were trying to provide more buffer from the north and south property lines than by ordinance as part of our conditions, as well as the intent for under RT for open space. I believe the RT zoning states that it's landscape area, which would be 30% coverage, maximum coverage on building, 20% open landscape area. So it's not actually a open space requirement under RT. I don't know if you can clarify that or not. So versus open space versus landscape area. In either case, we can comply with that 20%. So I think, unless you had anything else specifically, I covered most of what you were looking for.
Yeah, thanks. I just have one question on what you just discussed in terms of the EP, right? And I understand what you're saying about adding more protection than exists today. But are you cutting that buffer in half in your application?
It's
roughly.
Well, as we're seeing on the screen here, it's approximately 3/10 of an acre. So no, not in half. So we're at 0.9 going down to 0.6.
That's more.
No, it's less than half. In other words, he's saying
currently it's
half of 0.9 would be 0.4, 4.5, so he's still
40% reduction.
Yeah, he's still keeping 0.55. Was that what?
5.7. I'm looking at the screen, so we're going from existing at 0.93 down to a 0.57.
He's a banker.
Yeah. No, I get it. I understand.
We did it in red, not black. So
I'm sorry?
We did the coloring in red, not black. So
I get it, but I guess my point is you're adding more protection, but you're significantly reducing.
Correct.
The amount.
Because again, we don't that area was specifically slated as the detention pond for the entire Briggs Park development, should it have gone through. So it was only, and again, because of the way this curve was generated, it was purely for the purposes of meeting a specific site plan at a specific time that never got developed.
Right, but you've heard neighbors express some concern about the loss of green space and
Sure, and that's why we felt that 100-foot of buffer would more than adequately, provide that buffer between the two developments.
Any other questions for the applicant? Yes, Mr. Brown.
Just a comment. The way the city, the buildings are growing in city, and the current situation, the conversion of a EP zone into a RT zone is kind of like interesting. I don't think I like that. R1C to RT, we know we have a lot of discussion going on how we can handle that. Now, from a EP zone to RT, this is something I don't know if we want to do that here, especially in this location. So I have concern.
Quick thought.
Do we have anything else for the applicant? I
Yeah,
don't want to ask
just-
him to stand here if we don't.
No,
You do?
just
For the applicant?
and again, this is not, we can't impose any conditions. That's up to you to do that. But I just wanted to note that the council approved, the reason they approved that that RT going not all the way to the R1C existing homes is because they wanted to create that kind of buffer. In other words, have that still remain within that, above that curve area, R1C. So that was their fix for making sure that those people to the north of this development would not be negatively impacted by an RT right up against them, keeping it R1C, and then letting the developer. So those are kind of my concerns. The buffer between, the transition between the RT proposed and the R1C to the north, those homeowners. That's my concern is, you know, is there something you can do to look at that as to make, because again, council voted on that specific reason to keep it R1C. Now, you know, again, things change, but that's, you know, people rely on the vote of a council, and I don't want to just upend that for, you know, for development reasons. It has to be a sound compromise between the R1C to the north and the RT to the south.
Sure, and to respond specifically back to that original site plan, I'd argue that the farmhouse that was there originally was to remain based on the original purchase, and they took as much of the property as they needed in order to get their approach in and get their apartments along that half a parcel. So I think so I don't know that the purpose and intent in that situation was to create a buffer, but they used as much as they needed to bring the apartments that they were proposing or the townhouses they were proposing in to match their entrance. So that might be a different discussion. But as far as the R1C, if we go straight up with the RT zoning, we would have a 10-foot side setback from the residential. We're proposing to increase that as a voluntary condition of the conditional rezone from 10 feet to 30 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Savidan.
Just a couple things. One, it's been stated by numerous planning commission members that the EP zoning district was established by City Council in 2002. That is absolutely correct. This is a conditional rezoning. The Planning Commission is a recommending body, and ultimately this would go before City Council again for approval or denial. So it will be going back to the same body for consideration that established it in the first place. There was a question that was a comment question by Mr. McCauley. He was wondering what the plans were for stormwater detention, whether the applicant proposed to utilize the EP zoning for detention or whether they were going to put it elsewhere on the site. And I wonder if you could respond to that.
Certainly. The intent is that we would have our detention pond within the open space area. So we would also intend on maintaining a buffer of existing trees between the R1C and the EP zoning, and as needed or as offered, we could also offer that we would provide additional plantings between the detention pond and the R1C to further buffer.
Thank you. Ms. Cruz.
Just to clarify then, the 100 feet of buffer that you're proposing would also double as the detention area?
Correct.
And that detention area would include what I'm going to call like a circular area that would fill up as a pond as needed, but otherwise would be bare?
It would, we would shape it as best as possible, create a natural condition, but it would be a dry pond as requested by the City Engineering Department.
Thank you.
Mr. Napier.
So I'm looking at one of the drawings here, sheet EX-C. The side yard setback to the north, 10-foot side yard setback, 50-foot side yard setback. Have you considered any variation to actually make that an EP zoning as well? So shape it more as an L, including what you're proposing now to create more of that EP zoning buffer that is that permanent buffer. Was that ever considered in any variation of the site plan?
We could certainly look at that. So I guess I would suggest that rather than continue down the EP zoning, that we would look at doing that as an open space easement instead.
Which would protect it more than just a setback. Okay.
Anything else for the applicant? Ms. Cruz.
I think I heard one of the residents speak about recognizing that, there is going to be development at some level on these parcels of land, but that the homeowners association would like the opportunity to continue discussion about what that might look like. Is your firm and the person you represent, do you think that they're amenable to additional discussion about what the development on these parcels look like?
Yes. Yeah, and I think based on, unless there's any additional questions, I think based on the feedback that we've heard from the planning department, from the council, and from the neighbors, that we would respectfully request to be postponed tonight so we can go back and work through some of these issues and come back with a new plan.
I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, are we ready for a resolution?
I'll move it.
Thank you.
Resolved, the Planning Commission hereby postpones this item to provide the applicant an opportunity to clarify their application based on the issues identified in the report and comments by the Planning Commission. Furthermore, postponement will provide the applicant an opportunity to consider public comments from residents and input from the Planning Commission.
Support? Mr. Rahman, thank you. Ms. Zarnicki?
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 7 on the agenda is potential text amendments. Transitions, A, transitions, B, increasing square footage cap and B, I guess, increasing square footage cap in a cluster development. Mr. Carlisle.
Do you want to do the second one first?
Yeah, you want to start?
So can we flip B and A? And
Sure.
I think B is the easiest one, and let's kind of
Yes. It's very
get it out of the way.
straightforward.
So
Yes.
we talked about the if you remember when we came up with the cluster provisions, we wanted to encourage, incentivize the development of smaller homes that were appropriate for empty nesters. These would have first floor master suites, first floor laundries, and we spent considerable time trying to come up with the number that would best serve our intent. And we settled on 1,500, but we discussed the range between 1,500 and 2,000, and we've kind of kept talking about that for the last couple of years, what the perfect number was. And we've heard numerous developers indicate that 1,500 was a little bit small, didn't provide a lot of flexibility for developing units for empty nesters. And with the last application that came before us, that actually was able to incorporate 1,500 square feet, he did indicate that it was very tight, and he felt that even though he was coming forward with 1,500 square feet, that 1,700 square feet would have probably been somewhat easier to provide the type of unit that we wanted in the city of Troy. And that's what's proposed then is a very simple text amendment proposal, which is to change that 1,500 square foot number to 1,700 square feet to incentivize the development of empty nester type homes. If applicants want to come in smaller at 1,500 square feet, they certainly could, but the maximum square footage to meet the density bonus would be 1,700 square feet.
Thank you. And I agree with you. I think that's what we talked about, and it's not clear exactly what the right number is, but based on the feedback we got, that seemed like a better footprint than 1,500. Yes, Mr. Krant.
And one of the comments from that developer, which I like to hear, is that if he could increase it to that 1,700 square foot, he would be much easier to put a side entrance garage on it, so that again we don't have that garage door facing the street. And that's a great solution to avoid that appearance.
So what we propose is to put this in ordinance form and come back with a public hearing draft and schedule a public hearing.
Any other feedback or comments, Mr. Abhidian?
So I just had a thought. We've been talking about 1,500, 1,700 back and forth, and maybe just a point for discussion. to maybe incorporate an additional density bonus for a developer that actually comes forward with something that's 1,500 versus 1,700. If they're willing to actually even reduce it even more and bring a product that's that they can actually do the 1,500 versus take it to the 1,700 limit, maybe offer that additional incentive, because that's, we're still looking for that, right, in terms of a product that is a very small footprint. So I just had that thought.
I view the 1,700 as the
Yeah, no.
substitute for the 1,500.
That's a hard no.
No, too complicated.
I think the intent was not that. Why we wanted to make 1,700 was just not a good product. It's, you know,
Yeah.
so I think that last time when we were talking about that was the intent. So I mean, you know, maybe it's just
throwing it out, just seeing what would stick.
Yeah, that's what this is all about, open discussion. Good.
So
just to jump in, so if you recall, for the Midtown Crossing application on Rochester Road on the west side, that was 7 duplex units, 14 units total, that met that 1,500 square feet. If you recall, we talked about, the applicant was at the podium, and we talked about, gee, can you expand the foyer a little bit? Can you do this? And he said, we literally can't move any wall because we're right at 1,500 square feet, and if you move it a little bit this way and add a little area, it kills it, and you gotta find another area to make the kind of compensatory cuts. I think when you're talking about from 1,500 to 1,700, we're only talking about 200 square feet, which is a 10 by 20 area. So what this does is allows for a little bit of flexibility. Doesn't really give the developer that much more area. It seems like a lot, but it allows one to have maybe a little bit bigger master bedroom or a little bit larger laundry room, but not much else. You know, there's a little bit more flexibility there, but we're still talking only 200 square feet. We actually talked about this internally today, Mr. Abahedi, and we talked about your concept, but I agree that with I believe it was Commissioner Fowler, that it does add a complicating layer to something that's already somewhat complicated. I mean, I think developers, some of them tend to struggle with the language as it is, but you know, I hear where you're coming from.
Sounds like we have support for 1,700 square feet.
Yes, you do.
You have the guidance you need?
Yeah.
Okay. So item A.
Item A. I'll leave this to Ben.
Oh, the tough one. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, with Planning Commission members, we had a pretty lengthy discussion about this concept. And actually, I would say a couple lengthy discussions about this concept at the past meetings. And when we got into the discussion, it got very, and I'm talking about the height, setbacks, and transitional kind of concept from a zoning perspective. And we started playing it off versus the neighborhood nodes and the difference between how we would treat that versus Big Beaver versus Maple Road. When we left that meeting, both the director and I felt that really we should be separating the issues. Big Beaver is its own animal. Maple Road is its own animal. They are treated from a zoning perspective differently. What we're hearing from the Planning Commission and from residents really is concern right now is really the issue at the neighborhood nodes. And so instead of getting those issues intertwined with Big Beaver, we felt a best approach was to right now address neighborhood nodes, and then we can talk about Big Beaver moving forward. So with that being said, we're only talking about neighborhood. This would only apply to neighborhood nodes. And there's two parts to this. There's a height cap, and there's a setback landscape buffer based on the height cap. So as this is written, it was any parcel that is abutting, so parcel line to parcel line that's physically touching, the cap would be 2.5 stories, 30 feet in the neighborhood node. And that's consistent with all existing R1 zoning heights and setback, or heights. It's 2.5 stories, 30 feet. So that would be the same. Where a parcel is in a neighborhood node not abutting, so these are primarily not interior neighborhood nodes, but mostly the corner sites, so really at the hard corner of most of those intersections, they're not abutting single-family residential, we would permit you to go up to 3 stories, 38 feet in height. And again, that 3 stories, 38 feet is consistent with some of the townhome zonings in other districts that we have in place. Do you want me to go to setbacks now, or do you want to stop here?
I just have a question on that. So,
Yep.
How do we know that those corner sites are not going to be abutting R1C at any
Because we have a zoning map that shows what they're abutting now.
Okay, so that's that. From a fact,
We know where we can go parcel by parcel and tell you where this would apply and where this would not apply. And so we know which parcels would be allowed to be 3 stories, 38 feet, and which parcels would not be allowed 3 stories, 38 feet.
Okay, and then it would be the corner, so it wouldn't be one if it were fronted on, like the one we saw, Crooks.
There may be, it may be not necessarily a corner, it may be an interior, but it wouldn't be adjacent to single family. It would be adjacent to either another district or another neighborhood node parcel.
Okay.
But more likely than not, most of the ones that are not abutting single family now are at the corner, and that would allow a larger height. So again, that's the concept of transitioning. More height at the corner and transitioning as you move away from the corner to abutting adjacent single family districts or uses. So that's the true concept of transitioning that I think we've been trying to achieve in the nodes. We've been struggling with the issue where now we're getting development where they're the interior lots abutting single family and they're asking for the height that's above the 2.5 stories, 30 feet. So there's no real transition. It's single family, taller building, and then maybe nothing on the corner at this point, or maybe a 1-story office building now. So there's no the transition's kind of the opposite.
So I just want to ask one more question because it's a corner I'm familiar with. So at Waddles and Crooks, where you have the 7-Eleven.
Can you actually pull the GIS map?
And I'm just curious, so that 7-Eleven, I think that abuts a single family property.
I'll look it up for you.
There's a dental to the north, to the east?
To the east, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if the corner to the west is also in the node, because that I believe abuts single family properties.
This is a great example. Yeah, pull the zoning up. Okay. So as we've written it, I'm gonna. What did you do, Director?
I didn't touch it.
Here it comes.
Can you go back?
Super sensitive today.
We'll use this example. So, as the
You saw my hands. You saw my hands.
Yep.
One more time. I'm not gonna.
So everyone take a mental snapshot of what this looks like once he gets it up.
Back up.
Doesn't really help. Okay. Stay away. Okay.
For 10 seconds.
Okay.
If you can imagine.
I took the snapshot, so I'm ready. Yeah.
So as example is shown, there's 3 parcels that are at the corner, and then next to those parcels are 2 more at least on each side that are not at the corner. So those 3 at the corner, they're not abutting single family, they're abutting other neighborhood nodes. Those will be permitted to 38 feet, 3 stories. The ones that are interior
Or abutting
but abutting single family, those will be capped at 2.5 stories.
I see the distinction. So they're different parcels within the node.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Hudson, I think.
It's sort of a segue. Brent, as I read the proposed paragraph, it says height. Any building or portion of a building on a parcel abutting, quote, a 1-family residentially zoned parcel. Is that word a word of art? Because you can have a condominium, a site condominium, which would seemingly satisfy this. But if you have a regular condominium with apartments stacked on top of one another, those are all residentially owned parcels.
I use, and we can word.
I'm just trying to think that.
Yeah,
you might
I use the term
more, so we haven't got a 10-story condominium as a one residential.
I use the term one-family residentially zoned because that's how the zoning ordinance classifies R1 properties. They're called one-family residentially zoned properties. So it would apply to only parcels that are zoned R1A through E.
Wouldn't a condominium, site condominium be zoned that way?
But those are
So
single-family
instead of
detached.
spreading it, how do we stack that? Now we've got a height problem again.
I guess I don't.
Wouldn't that be multi?
It would be
Condominium,
multifamily.
You got a couple things. You've got the site condominiums, which are individual homes, physically separated, but the common area is the condominium.
And those are zoned, but those are also still zoned R1, either R1A through R1E.
Okay, I agree.
Yep.
But now the developer says, I'm not going to do site condo. I'm going to put all 9 or 10 units in one building, and we're going to stack them. Is there a height problem now?
Stack them in a node?
No, we're talking about a node now. We've got a developer who wants to do some residential homes. But he's going to do it in a condominium. So he's going to have 4-story condominium. On each story, there's going to be a couple units, all residential, single-family units. So I guess my question is this going to permit a 4 or 5-story single-family residence in a zoned area?
No one's going to cap that.
It's going to cap the height.
38 feet height, right? There is a 38 feet height cap that you just mentioned.
If it's not abutting single family, if it's abutting single family, it's 2 stories, 2.5 stories.
This is the single family. Now, you're going to have this abutting. We're talking about abutting a one-family residentially zoned parcel. So if you've got a condominium in there with 4 stories in a residentially zoned area, you're trying to prevent a height problem with abutting properties, but now you've got a big building there. You're losing me?
Let me tell you, maybe I'm going to show my ignorance. But I thought that the R1 was the single-family detached home.
Yes.
And what you're describing, where you own your condominium and you have one family living in the condominium that you own, but instead of them, but you've stacked them now, you've got 2 to a floor, and that to me is multifamily.
That qualifies as you're only allowed to do that in the multifamily district.
You would have to have multifamily.
So you
zone.
couldn't do what you're saying to do. You couldn't do that in a single family district. You can't do it in R1 through R1E.
That's why I was asking the question,
Okay.
whether or not it's a word of art or there's a big loophole here. So if the zoning ordinance says non-attached, does it say a non-attached home in a single-family residential area?
The zoning ordinance caps the height in R1A, B, C, D, and E at 30 feet and 2.5 stories.
Okay. All right. I think that answers the question.
The intent of all this is a node parcel next to a single family R1 through E mirrors the same height that's permitted in the single family district.
I guess my point was, if I was not incorrect, was you could have a single-family residence with a node abutting, but if it's 4 stories, what are you doing here? You've still got a problem with height. It's academic. I got the answer. I think it's not going to happen.
Okay.
But that was what I was looking at.
Mr.
Rapid.
So
I want to recognize Mr. Abedi because he's trying to.
question for Mr. Stout and Mr. Carlisle, just a thought on this. So with this zoning, will this change to the ordinance freeze the neighborhood node to what it is today without prohibiting any kind of rezoning between neighborhood node and single family? Or what I thought about is a hypothetical. For example, we have neighborhood node today abutting directly to a single family home. Would it be possible, or would this zoning allow for a rezoning of a portion of that property that today is zoned neighborhood node between single family to, let's say, for example, an RT? So now the neighborhood node would no longer be next to a single family after the rezoning, it would be next to an RT. Would this zoning prohibit, would it freeze the parcels in that neighborhood node, or would it still allow any kind of potential rezoning even between neighborhood node and single family?
Any property owner can apply for any rezoning.
So potentially it could happen.
And the planning commission would consider the 5 standards that we went over tonight, and part of our job would be say, and here are the implications of if you rezone this parcel, then it affects these parcels. So that would be part of the things that the planning commission and ultimately city council would consider as part of the rezoning.
The planning commission and city council, because it would have to go to city council, would look at the master plan to determine if it's consistent with the master plan and the goals of the master plan. They'd look at those 5 standards for rezoning, just like they do any other rezoning. So theoretically, yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's possible. But that's the protection, is we've got a policy document, the master plan. We've got standards in the zoning ordinance that protect us.
Right, same criteria, but my thought was potentially that could happen to create that step down and that actual transition that we're looking at that today we don't have between neighborhood node and single family, but potentially it could happen, right?
Yes, Mr. Rowan.
So just to understand that, I will just use an example, maybe 2 examples. So if I have a neighborhood node where we have 4 parcels, so out of 4 parcels, 1 can be 38 feet, the hard corner one, is that right?
Depends what's abutting.
It depends what's abutting. I mean, if only one, if 3 of the 4 are abutting single family,
yeah,
and one's not.
No, we are currently considering 1 corner, right, of the neighborhood node, and I have 4 parcels, 2 by 2. So 1 parcel, the corner one, hard corner one, can be converted to a like 38 feet height building. Other 3 cannot be. Those will be 2.5 story, 30 feet. Is that right?
If they are abutting single family residential.
Yeah, they are abutting single family.
Yes.
And then I'm going to use another example. It's 3 by 3 this time. So 4 will be, we can convert 4 of them to 38 feet, but all 5, they will be 30 feet. That's the way I understand, right? The parcels on the periphery with the single family cannot be. If I have 3 by 3, 9 parcels.
I think you're right. I think the parcels on the periphery that abut single family would be at the lower height.
So I have 9 parcels in the corner. It's a big corner. 9 parcels. So only 4 can be converted.
I don't know that, I mean, so just very black and white. If it's abutting, if a property line touches a property line of a single family to a neighborhood node, that parcel in the neighborhood node that's abutting and touching can be 2.5 stories, 30 feet. If it's not abutting, doesn't abut single family, it can be a maximum of 3 stories, 38 feet. And this is not unusual. We have the same provision in the zoning ordinance for multifamily. Right. We have a cap for multifamily in height and density if it's adjacent single family when it's not. So this is not an unusual precedent that we've already got in the ordinance.
I understand. I just wanted to give an example so that we can understand a little better. So did I make it clear to the other planning commission members?
No.
No? Okay, so here is we have a corner, we have a hard corner where we have 3 by 3, 9 parcels. So the 5 parcels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, cannot be converted to a 38 feet. But the hard corner 4 parcels can be converted to a 38 feet height building. That's what I'm saying. So
that's only if they abut single family. If they don't abut,
definitely when it's abutting the family, you can pass it on.
So your point is you're just giving an example.
I'm giving an example, yeah, just so that we're clear about it. Because I know that there will be a situation where there will be just 1 building for the whole place. So how am I going to handle that? Because are we going to be consistent with that portion of the building will be 38 feet tall, and then the other part will be like 30 feet tall? That's something that we need to figure out. Because
one building?
No. What I'm saying is, if the whole thing become one commercial construction.
Okay.
30 feet.
So maybe I'm being too simplistic, and I can't believe I'm going to say this as a lawyer. I feel like I'm doing logic puzzles from the LSAT. We're overthinking this. We're making it far more complicated than what it needs to be. If you're in a neighborhood, in the discussion, if you're in a neighborhood node, and one of your neighborhood node parcels abuts R1 residential, R1 through 5 residential, It can't be taller than 30 feet high, period, dot. That's, we're done. We're done. No more thinking. We're done.
Yes, that's what it says.
Okay, yeah.
That was
That's
easy.
what it says. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. We're overthinking this.
I'm not.
Now, if it doesn't abut R1, 1 through 5, then it can be 38 feet.
A and B, right.
We're done. We're done. Right? This, well, what if it gets rezoned? And what if, and what if? We don't need the what ifs. We already know. If it abuts, it's this. If it doesn't, it's that. Done.
You're right.
Done.
Yeah, it's done.
Move on.
I agree. So, go ahead.
All right.
I'm done.
Are you?
I'm good.
You good? Okay.
I just wanted to use an example.
Mr. Crane.
Just go right ahead to setback and greenbelt. Yeah.
Yes. I'm fine with the language. I think we have consensus on that.
I do.
Let's do it.
I'm sorry?
Let's do it.
Let's move on.
Yes, okay.
You're the chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead and what?
Greenbelt.
Oh, I'm sorry. So.
We're not done. We have more to
Yeah,
dissect.
so now number 2,
Setback.
setback and greenbelt. So is that Mr. Carlisle again?
Yeah, this is a little more complicated, so I'll try to make this hopefully.
Really simple.
Yeah. So again, this one only applies to parcels that are abutting, touching single family. Whereas touching single family, the setback of the building shall be equal to the height. So if you have a 30-foot building, the setback to the property line that's abutting that has to be 30 feet, okay? Within that 30 feet, in addition, you have to have at least a 20-foot wide landscape or green belt. So normally when we talk about setback, that's setback from a building to a property line. Within that, normally in zoning, within that you can have drive aisles, you can have parking, you can have other things. What we're doubling down and saying, in addition to the setback equal to the height, you have a minimum of a 20-foot wide landscaped green belt buffer. No parking, no drive aisles. It has to be landscaped, clean, just landscaping, etc.
Within the 30 feet.
Within the 30 foot. Yep, it's not an addition, it's within the 30 feet. So you have a building setback, and then you have, in addition, within that 30 feet, I'm using 30 feet as an example, it could be 25, whatever. You have additional 20, you have not additional, within that 30 feet, you have a 20-foot green belt as well.
Okay.
How I've written it, and is that there may be cases through the site plan review process where there may be some leeway the Planning Commission wants to give an applicant with regards to the setback and the green belt. We've written provisions in here that allows the Planning Commission through a process to deviate from that and give relief to those two provisions, only setback and landscaping. And we've got 6 standards with regards to those. And they're somewhat similar to rezoning standards, or somewhat similar to a variant standard. But that's done through the site plan process with the Planning Commission in front of the public. I don't know, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, I would say that presently for landscaping, the Planning Commission does have flexibility. There are standards for a greenbelt buffer, but the Planning Commission has the authority to require, a wall in lieu of, or a combination of wall, landscaping, et cetera. So there are circumstances today under the ordinance as part of site plan review where there is this subjectivity. We talked about this internally. The subjectivity, this is a little, do we want to go down this path? I mean, that's why we're here to talk about it this evening.
One question, what's the current setback requirement in the neighborhood node?
0. If it's a side yard, where most of these are side yard relationships, it's 0. But that being said, there is a requirement also to have landscape transition, which is a mix of you could deviate that and allow a wall. You have the authority to do that, but for the most part, it's evergreen. So in reality, there's probably going to be at least a 5-foot green belt to permit the required screening that's required. But in theory, it could be 0.
Okay, so this is substantially greater.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I like it.
Mr. Appidia.
I have a question for Mr. Carlisle on the standard number 6. Can you give an example of the deviation will not adversely impact off-site natural features? I'm trying to kind of wrap my mind around that, of an off-site natural feature that is not on the property.
Yeah, so you're abutting a wetland. There's a wetland on the other site, and you are deviating so much that the potential loss of what that setback or greenbelt would be would impact that adjacent the wetland on the adjacent site.
Okay, so
or a tree stand or something of more of a natural feature that's on the other site that would be impacted by by that site reducing the amount of setback or greenbelt.
Okay, so in that illustration, the way I'm envisioning it is the wetland probably crosses the property line into the property that's being developed, possibly.
Wouldn't necessarily have to. It could be right on the property line. It could be 10 feet off the property line, but there's evidence that reducing the greenbelt would impact the future of that wetland.
So reducing the green belt on the proposed project would impact the wetland of a adjacent site that is not being affected in any other way by this proposed project. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's just one example I gave of how that would be applied.
Ms. Cruz.
Okay, so now maybe my English degree is showing. So when I read, when a parcel is abutting a one-family residential zoned parcel, the building setback from the property line, blah, 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 shall be no less than the height of the proposed building or 20 feet, whichever is greater, period. So then I go, and when a parcel is abutting a one-family residential zoned parcel, a minimum 20-foot landscape green belt shall be maintained from the property line of the one-family residential zoned parcel. So I'm wondering, when I first read that, I added the two together, right? And you just said to me that no, that green belt has to be incorporated as part of the setback. So I'm wondering if it doesn't make sense, as you look at the language under letter B, that you clarify that that 20-foot landscaped green belt is incorporated into the previous sentence addressing the setback.
We can do that.
And then finally, 20 feet just frankly is not enough. I don't know that we can do anything about that, but that's, I mean, I can spit 20 feet.
Well, so old school zoning, you know, the more kind of zoning that we're used to seeing, which the planners call Euclidean, which is about separation of land uses. The rule of thumb is the height of the building basically equals the setback. So if you have a really tall building, there's a really big setback. So, I mean, if you wanted to eliminate the subjectivity and just forget about flexibility, you just go with A. It's got to be 30 feet or no less than the height of the building or 20 feet, whichever's greater.
No, I'm suggesting that in letter B, when you're talking about the green belt, that you just clarify that it's the 20-foot green belt is not in addition to the setback. It's incorporated into the setback. It's part of.
Clarify that.
Clarify that, so you don't read it and. Don't read it A and B equals 50 feet or 40 feet.
Yeah. Okay.
And like I said, that just could be the English major in me. And then again, I stand firm on my belief that 20 feet is absolutely not enough distance, because I can spit that far.
So if 20 feet's not enough, then, and there was concurrence of the planning commission, then it shall be no less than the height of the proposed building, period.
No. So, but the 20 feet is the green belt.
It's the green belt.
You want the green belt to be, well, what do you want the green belt to be?
I don't think, I have driven past, the reason I bring this up is because I have driven past 100 times the location on Troy Street in Big Beaver where the Cooper's Hawk winery is going into, and I see where the edge of that parking lot ends and where the wall of the R1 single-family home garage begins, and I swear it's about 20 feet, and it's nothing. It's like, it's nothing. It's nothing. I look at that in horror every day, and I think, yeah, 20 feet's nothing.
Setback for places of worship is 70 feet, right?
For a place of worship? 50 feet.
50 feet. So why don't we just do 50 feet in that case? So the building height is still 30 feet, right? I don't remember. Places of worship in the residential neighborhood.
But I'm just saying, if you, with the way that this is written, 20 feet could be everything. It could be not only your setback figure, it could also be your green belt. No?
It's 30 feet, right? Well, it's the height of the building.
It's the height of the building. If the building is 20 feet.
Yeah, why is that there in A? Why does it say, why don't you just have a period after building? Why does it say or 20 feet, whichever is greater?
Because you have a building that's 14 feet tall, a one-story building, and you want to make sure you have at least 20-foot setback there.
Right.
This is to handle cases where you have a shorter than 20-foot building. So we want to establish at least a minimum of 20 feet.
Okay.
Because that's going to be equal to the landscape buffer. We want to make sure that the minimum of the building setback is equal to the landscape buffer, so that
All the buildings are not going to be 30 feet.
not all the buildings are 30 feet. I mean, it's unlikely you're going to have less than 20 feet.
No.
But this is to protect in case we do.
Like I said, I understand we have all of this precedent, we have these ordinances, we have all the things the way that they've always been done. I'm just saying 20 feet it's nothing.
So in that case, should we just have another, go around and see who likes how many feet? I mean, to me, it's like 50 feet can.
I think personally 50 feet is a minimum. I mean, if you're someone.
I just want to ask, and what is the current requirement in the note? Did you say
0?
Like essentially 0 or 5 feet?
Yes. I mean, by zoning, you could get 0. However, there is a transition requirement for landscaping, which you're at least 5 feet to meet those requirements. So you could, right now, it's technically probably 5.
And the reason I asked that question again is because I think we're certainly moving in a positive direction. I'd be concerned about going to 50 or 70 from where we are today and not understanding the impact. So let me ask Mr. Savran to make a point, because I think he was going to respond to what I said.
I agree with what you just said. We're moving in the right direction. So zoning is about balance, finding a balance. And one of the things we want to balance is protection of single-family residential properties. That's on one side. We also have a master plan that talks about expanding the range of housing opportunities. That's on the other side. We want to find that balance. I fear that if we go to a 50-foot setback, which is 5 feet more than the rear yard setback of the R1A, which is that's pretty significant. I think we're going to tip the balance, and we're not going to see any development in the notes. That's what's going to happen, I believe. I think
certainly the risk, right?
I think this is about balance. Right now, 5 stories is the maximum height. We're proposing to dramatically reduce that to 38 feet. So if a development is abutting single-family residential, 30 feet.
30 feet, yeah.
If it's not, it's a whole 8 feet higher. It's not 3 stories higher, it's 8 feet higher, which is a little bit more than my wingspan, 2 feet more, okay? So we're not talking about the end of the world here with another extra 8 feet. So just let's, think about the balance.
And the direction we're moving, right?
Yes.
Ms. Abhidian.
So just to piggyback thought on that, I mean, we have parcels now that might be 100, 120, 130 feet in the neighborhood node. With the setback right now that we have of 0 feet for side yard setbacks, if we go to 50, we're making that parcel not developable.
Yeah.
So we're making it not buildable.
Okay.
So to go from 0 to 50, we're just eliminating, hypothetically, without even looking, we're eliminating probably quite a lot of parcels in neighborhood nodes and not making developable unless they get combined with another parcel adjacent to it.
Okay.
I'm not, is that where we want to go? I mean, if that's where we want to go, then, yeah, then we go 50.
No, I was just saying that, that 20 feet is, because currently the way it is, buildings are not going to be 30 feet tall. So it will end up, we're going to have only 20 feet because that's the Greenbelt regulation, right? So is 20 feet enough? To me, it's not. So the question is 50 feet or 20 feet? Which one we should pick, or we should?
So if it's
Before we do that, I want to recognize Ms. Cruz. Go ahead.
All I was going to say is I can concede the 20 feet in a neighborhood node district because it's supposed to be a denser zoning situation. I can save this argument, and you will hear it again in another opportunity where it might make more sense. In the whole world of pick your battles, maybe this isn't the spot for me to really start nitpicking setbacks and green space in between single-family homes and other developments, but it is on my mind. Like I said, I promise to entertain you again one day with it.
Fair enough. Mr. Rahman, did you have a point?
No, I just wanted to make sure we understand what will be the right one, because I know that 50 feet, yes, I understand Mr. Savidan's point that the developer would not come for a, commercial building with that kind of setback, but at the same time, 20 feet is not a big change. Because although it says 30 feet, the height of the building, but the examples we have right now, it doesn't show like there are like 30 feet tall buildings there. So there will be shorter buildings. In that case, 20 feet requirement will be more applicable than 30 feet. So my question is 20 feet enough? Or we can just say that 30 feet setback, that's it. Don't worry about the setback equal to height of the building. Can we do that?
You certainly could. I think there's a couple things you need to think about. One is what Mr. Apahidi was saying is that a lot of these are very narrow parcels to begin with, so you're really rendering a lot of them to be unbuildable, and so I would be concerned that we're creating a taking issue. So that's first, and then second, if you make the setback, the building setback, and the landscape buffer the same, you're basically not allowing people to have four-sided access around the building, and you can't put things within that landscape buffer. So the reason why we have the setback plus the landscape areas, because then you can have a drive aisle on the other side. You could have other things within that within the setback, but it's not a landscape buffer. If you make them equal, you're really not allowing. It really very much hamstrings the ability to site plan and lay out a site.
So 20 feet is protected.
Sorry?
20 feet is the protected setback.
20 feet is a
protected.
It may not be to the totality of some of the planning commissioners would like. It's a pretty big step from what we have now.
No, of course, no.
And especially in relation to the combination with the setback of the building in relation to the height. So we're talking about a 20-foot wide landscape buffer with nothing can go in there, can't have a drive aisle. We don't have anything like that right now in place in the neighborhood nodes. It's a significant amount of more buffer than what we have now.
Mr. Lambert, sorry.
Two quick questions on the language in here. Under 2C, when it talks about shall not permit a setback or green belt that is less than required in the building form or section 13.02B, can you clarify exactly what you're talking about there?
So in the building forms, we do have setbacks. They're mostly for rear yard, so that would more apply to the rear yard setbacks. You can't reduce the amount of the rear yard setback. And then 1302B talks about the screening requirements that are the minimum screening requirements, so we don't want to allow the deviation from those. You still have to meet those.
Okay. And then one other follow-up question is that item 6 there, where the deviation will not adversely impact any on-site or off-site natural features. Is the term natural feature something within the purview of the Planning Commission to determine what's a natural feature, or is that defined in city ordinance?
not defined in the ordinance. It would be up to the planning commission.
Okay, thank you.
So after all the conversation about the setback and the greenbelt, I have one more question. So if the setback ends up being 20 feet, what's the width of the greenbelt?
20 feet.
20 feet.
But because I thought you had said in one of your previous comments you didn't want the greenbelt to consume the whole setback because you didn't have four-sided access to the building.
It's not ideal, but that's the choice that the applicant has chosen. He could do more than 20 feet. He could do more. He could do 30 feet. He could do 40 feet. He could do 50 feet. But you know, at a minimum 20 feet landscape buffer and a minimum 20-foot building setback. That's the minimums.
Okay.
Thanks. Let me throw a little monkey wrench into our discussion. You've got setbacks. You've got height. There's nothing regarding density, is there, in a node?
Currently, nodes and all form-based districts are regulated by setbacks, height, and parking or in open space requirements. So
shouldn't we begin a discussion on density?
The planning commission.
Not tonight, but I'm just thinking that.
So because I thought about that, but aren't all those other factors going to control the density?
Yeah, but it might be nice to have a statement as to density in there somewhere. Maybe not a certain figure, but I've been concerned about that, and I think other members of the commission also have been concerned about density, especially in the discussion we had about a week or two ago.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But again, with the larger setback, lower height.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, again, certainly those two things.
Building 800 square foot cubes in a building.
Mr. Appiedi.
So maybe I just want to throw this out as a proposal, and something that can help us visualize the impact of making this change to the ordinance. If we can take a project that we already approved in a neighborhood node with the existing ordinance and apply this ordinance to it and see how that would impact the setbacks, see how that would impact the height, and see how that impacted density. So we can actually visualize to get a feel for what happens. You know, are we going from, let's say, well, we can take any project, if you can, if for a future date, put something together and just give us that illustration. Are we going from 60 units to 30 units? Are we going from 60 units to 50 units? You know, just obviously we're not the designer here, we're not the architect, but just to give us an idea, what does that do to that impact of that project? You know, because to your point, Mr. Hudson, we're already impacting density with these setbacks, right? So we're just that's a given. That's a default. So
and height.
And height, right? So we're already impacting density. We're impacting number of units. How are we impacting that density by just these setbacks? Let's look at an existing project that we already approved and see what that does to it, and that gives us a good feel for that.
Ms. Fowler?
I would just like to say that I think we need to move quickly relative to these changes. We already have applications that are not going to be impacted by this because the applications have already been made. And if we wait longer, there are going to be more applications, and this is not going to have the impact we would like it to have. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm concerned about density too.
Yeah.
I did look at the video that Ollie had, that Brent actually sent to us, and it did talk about density, but it said that the transitional height as well as the setbacks really will control the density. And so they did not recommend in that particular video having control over the density. I personally like control over the density, but I would not like that to postpone us moving forward with these recommendations.
I agree with that comment. And I think what we've seen is, or what we're discussing is significant modifications. So.
And I think, just correct me, but has how many applications have there been since the 60-unit one? I know there's been at least one other.
It's 9 o'clock at night, I think 2.
2. Okay, so we have 2 more that have come in, and they're going to continue to come in.
I don't think we can come to a quote-unquote right answer tonight either. Right? I don't think there is one.
I agree. Commissioner Fowler and I have had some discussions on density. I agree with you in terms of acting. We need to act quickly on this, and then I think we can discuss density at a later time. I think we're going to have significant discussion about density, and it's going to slow down the process of this proposed language getting approved.
Mr. Carlin?
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, density is a really, really tricky thing to nail down because, we talk about density in terms of number of units, but the impact of a 4-bedroom unit is different than the impact of a 1-bedroom unit. So we always categorize it in the quantity of a unit. So it's a very, very moving, fluid kind of way to measure impact. And so I think we would run the risk of being bogged down moving this forward if we get into the issue of density, because then we got to start talking about that fluidity of what that really means. So
I agree. When I suggested density, I didn't mean to do that. I like going forward with what we've got now. Put that in place. We can talk about density later.
Yeah.
So do we have consensus to move forward with the current language?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
With the one correction that Ms. Cruz has brought up, and certainly that can be clarified.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, correct.
And,
correct. So to
yes.
make it clear that
Right.
it's not the setback plus the grade.
Exactly, and I just want to make sure there is the deviation element as well in item C, and I just want to make sure that there's consensus to allow for a deviation, that the Planning Commission wants to retain that ability to do that.
Yes.
Yes.
We like discretion.
don't say that to him.
So, Mr. Chairman, what we'll do is we'll put this one in formal ordinance format and schedule a public hearing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item number 8, public comment for items on the current agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to make a comment on an item on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I'll move to item number 9, Planning Commissioner comment. Planning Commission comment. I'll start with Mr. Rupp.
I'm all set.
Ms. Fowler?
All set.
Mr. Rappahannock?
I'm all set, thank you.
Mr. Hudson? Ms. Cruz?
I have a question for Attorney Bloom. I'm just curious how often the zoning ordinances get reviewed and what would prompt review of zoning ordinances? What would be a triggering event or that would make sense for the language in those ordinances to potentially be updated or reviewed?
Many times, it's a recommendation of the Zoning Board of Appeals that comes to you. Also, the Planning Commission can make recommendations. Obviously, if there are issues with development and there are difficulties in interpreting things, that would potentially be brought for a text amendment as well. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. I don't think that obviously, we've done a comprehensive review fairly recently, but we don't it's mostly on an as-needed basis.
So you said fairly recently, like when?
2011, was it?
2011 was the last comprehensive rewrite.
Yeah.
That was the ordinance?
Comprehensive.
Comprehensive review of the zoning ordinances.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? Sometimes there's case law that it's not necessarily just zoning ordinances, it's other ordinances, like there was a landmark case involving signs that prompted us to consider revisions to the sign ordinance. That's another thing that can prompt the city attorney to get involved in suggesting changes to an ordinance.
But again, in 2011, we just proactively looked at everything?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't realize that.
Well, that was 9 years. I mean, that's long, 10 years.
No, understood. Mr. Krent?
Just one question or one thing to think about is the transitions we talked about tonight for the neighborhood nodes. I'm wondering if something like this might also be applicable in the future to the Rochester Road area, because it's been a controversial issue in the past couple months, at least since I've been on the Planning Commission.
We've addressed height, we haven't addressed the setback issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here, and good to see everybody.
Mr. Carlisle? It's nothing from me. Mr. Apahidian?
Just one more thought. I'm kind of in an unprecedented situation. Depending on the November 5th elections, this could be my last planning commission meeting. So I'm not sure, but so I just wanted to throw
You've
that out
had a
there.
grand time being with us, haven't you?
I have. It's been great.
Hoping.
Thank you. Nothing from me. We are adjourned.
Thanks, Paul.